Joel Wendt here again. I've been talking about God and where God is and how to meet God and God around you and within you and those kinds of things. And again, keep in mind that I'm talking about you thinking for yourself about these things. The stuff I say to you should only inspire you. But I do want to bring forward something that's in my work in many places, and this is going to be a really mind-blowing idea because I'm going to talk about the second coming of Christ, and people are going to go, ah! Well, sorry. The question is, from a spiritual scientific point of view, whether that's a fact. And of course, people have a lot of different ideas whether you can even have a spiritual fact, because they mostly conceive of the spiritual as systems of belief, and not something that can be apprehended in a scientific fashion. But what I'm going to do today when I talk about the second coming of Christ is I'm going to talk about a way to actually know something about that that's quite different from outer Christianity, and again we're going to call it this other Christianity, this natural Christianity, this Christ impulse that exists in every human being. Now, Christ said some interesting things. He said a lot of interesting things, actually, that are recorded in the Gospels. He said, I and the Father are one. Very interesting. Now, that has a little bit of something maybe to do with the idea of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then he says, no one gets to the Father except through me. Okay. And he says, I have much more to say to you, but you can't bear it just yet. Okay. Now you take these statements of Christ, and instead of isolating them as little bits and pieces here and there, you add them up and begin to make a synthesis rather than an analysis of what's in the Gospels. You can get a very different picture. Now, the second coming. Well, in the Gospels, the second coming is actually talked about in two different ways. In Matthew, for example, there's one way where he talks about it in terms of the end times. And then there's another way when he's talking to, I think, a government official when he's being tortured and prepared to be crucified. And he tells the government official that they're going to see each other again. And you can think that's the end time, but you also could think that that something else is going to happen. And of course, a lot of Christian, traditional Christianity is sort of stuck with this idea, and it's been really badly abused by the Left Behind people and all the rest of that. They don't actually think much about this. But anyway, they have this idea that they can make Christ come by bringing about the end of the world, and you've maybe seen some of these things, which are kind of ridiculous and a bit scary, actually. But here we're talking about what goes on in human thinking, and about individual moral impulses, which I'm calling related to the Christ impulse. Just like there's a Buddha nature, there's something in us that's willing to sacrifice our own self for the benefit of other people. And anybody who's been in a love relationship or parents children or takes up certain kind of work is familiar with that. You have this urge in you, this will in you, this quality as opposed to a quantity. It says, I want to do something good for other people, even if it's painful to me. And in the film Pay It Forward and in the television series Joan of Arcadia, you can see examples of this. Also, the last few films of Clint Eastwood have this stuff all over it. It's just there because artists recognize in the world this human capacity for self-sacrifice. In Gran Torino, for example, Eastwood makes this happen in a very, he's so upfront in making it Christian that it's kind of mind-blowing in a way. You don't know what to do. You really like the film, you like what happens, you like the character he plays, and then you look at him laying there. Well, I won't, tell the end of the story because you should see that, but Clint Eastwood, who's a curmudgeon of sorts and associated with all kinds of violence, and the last person you'd think knows anything about Christianity, well, he knows a lot about the other Christianity. He knows it because he sees it in the human condition. He sees the natural Christianity that I've talked about. He sees people being this, and he understands the dilemma that we're faced with in the present by the conflicts in which we're going to be involved. And that's one of the reasons for the teachings of the True Eyed Brother coming out at this time, because people need to have some understanding of what the hell's going on in the world with all the craziness. Okay? And the God that I know, the Creator that I've met, He encompasses all of that. In fact, He says at a certain point in the Gospels, in my Father's house are many mansions. Now, that's a very interesting juxtaposition of two ideas which on the surface don't make any sense. A mansion is bigger than a house. But then it's His Father's house. In His Father's house are many mansions. Well, what does that include? Well, it says basically, if you think about it, it says, for example, that Christ, when He talks about the Creator, when He talks about the Father, when He talks about Himself, when He says, I and the Father are one, and no one gets to the Father except through me, and when you look at what I've been saying here, and I talk about the Christ impulse in yourself, the fact that you want to be a moral human being, there you are. You are involved with becoming Christ-like. Now, you can make that a big thing. I want to die on the cross. That's not it at all. You know, Christ says, for example, in the Gospels, take my yoke upon you. I'm humble and meek. You know. Anyway, so here we are. We have this interior life with which we're very familiar, and in this interior life, in modern times, we're confronted in our biographies by events which say, what are you going to do? Are you going to do the good thing? Are you going to do a right thing? How the hell do you know what a good thing or a right thing is? And people kind of scratch their heads, you know. And then if they're churched, some preacher's telling them what the right thing and the good thing is. And for a lot of people, this is difficult. There's great big huge splits running right through the middle of the Catholic Church, for example, between the laity and the hierarchy, because the hierarchy seems to be bent on totally not being moral. I mean, the whole problem with the abuse of children and the cover-up of the abuse of children. I mean, it's not just that priests abuse children, it's that bishops and cardinals covered it up and transferred and refused to let these priests be confronted by secular authority. You know, among the laity, among the ordinary moral people in this time, and they look at their church authorities, they go, how can you do that? That has to be wrong. And so you have this conflict today that exists between what we might call the moral authority of institutional religions, which everybody kind of chafes under. Everybody's kind of unhappy with it. In fact, if you look at sociologically at the history of natural science, part of what natural science did was rebel against the authority of the Roman Church. And in the beginning they were killed for it, and later they were kind of triumphant in a way. But if you look at the moral question, you see a lot of people who don't want to pay any attention to somebody else telling them what moral is. They want to decide for themselves. And if you look at the film of Clint Eastwood, or you look at Pay It Forward or Joan of Arcadia, you will see artists grasping a hold of the fact that in today, the natural Christian impulse, this other Christianity that exists in ordinary human beings, manifests itself when we decide ourselves what the moral thing to do is. Through our own thinking, we work our way through to what the right moral thing to do is. And that's a mystery in which, if you pay attention to it, you're involved in meeting the Creator.